everyone, and welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab and Co-Creation Studio Lecture Series. I'm Sarah Wallison. I'm a white woman with glasses in front of an orange background, and I'm the director of the MIT Open Documentary Lab. Our public talks are a way for us to be in conversation with people who are exploring expanded notions of documentary and new documentary forms and processes. They're finding new ways of telling stories, they're exploring co-creative practices, and creating and critiquing with emerging technologies. They're finding new ways to create meaning, to reveal perspectives, many unheard, and share stories that matter. And today, we are thrilled to welcome May Abdalla. Thank you so much, May, for joining us today. May is a highly acclaimed director and one of my favorites. Her work is truly groundbreaking and transformative. I've had many experiences where I've gone through them, and because of the way she uses technology and the embodied experience, and very multisensory, you really come out with a new perspective. It's very, very exciting. Her previous work has been screened at the BBC, Al Jazeera, and she's been at Cannes and co-founded Anagram, a multi-award winning studio exploring immersive technology and nonfiction storytelling. And her projects have presented at many festivals all over the world, and she has won numerous awards, including the Grand Jury Award for Best VR at Venice Festival in 2021 and the Venice Immersive Achievement Award in 2024. Today, she's going to talk to us about her process and insights, and her talk entitled The Proof is in the Pudding, Developing and Testing Immersive Experience to Create Impact. She's going to talk about her latest project, Impulse, a mixed reality story exploring what it means to live with ADHD. She'll dive into social and ethical challenges of working with medical language and navigating the health sector. And she'll also, at the end, talk to us a bit about Amorphous, which is her work that's in early development. And she'll showcase her test-based approach, which is truly genius and fascinating. And as she says, she uses everything from potatoes to socks to motion capture. May will present for about 50 minutes, and then afterwards we'll have a Q&A with the lab fellows and with all of you. Please add your questions in the Q&A or raise your digital hand during the Q&A session so that we can see that you have a question and make sure we get to it, although we may not get to everyone, so I want to put that out there. So without further ado, I'm passing to May. May, thank you so much, and take it away.
Okay, so I am unmuted. Hi, everybody. Thanks for showing up to my talk. I am now just saying a few things while I click buttons so I can share a screen. So, what a fantastic intro. Okay, so the title of my talk is The Proof is in the Pudding. And as many of you might know, this is, I'm going to say an ancient phrase, which was originally the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the reason that I wanted to kind of give this like bit of a visceral, hands-on, messy, food-based analogy to something which has got none of those things in it is because I guess when I think about immersive, the question is, what does immersive really feel like? And what I'm going to try and do is tell the story of what it means to get your hands dirty and really just eat your project to know if it tastes good. So a bit about me. So I started off as a news journalist, and probably for the same reasons as many people would feel that the news is a difficult place to be right now. I had those feelings around 11 years ago when I was working in news and documentaries around the impossibility of using language in the right way. And what would you need to do to, as opposed to in like mainstream media, repeat the the kind of the metaphors and the divisive terminology, even the subtleties of that over and over again, what could you do that would feel different? And so that was when I was working at the BBC in their current affairs department. And in many ways, Anagram, which I started with a friend called Amy in 2013, was really kind of a question that we both had was, could documentaries feel more in our bodies than in our minds? So it's a little bit of a perverse kind of question to ask oneself, but still we're kind of testing out that. So 13 years later, what has Anagram been doing? So I'm just kind of talking over some of the kinds of projects that we've been doing, which I guess in a traditional way is immersive in that it uses XR technology. But we think a lot about sets. We think a lot about how can we challenge language. And yes, we've had a pretty extraordinary run, and we come from pretty humble beginnings in that most this kind of like theatrical immersive theatre meets kind of non-fiction being like a real particular ground base. And there's even a quote here from William Maricchio, who used to be at Sarah's lab. And so anyway, so what's this approach? This quote from Rilke really I feel like it's a good place to start. The point is to live everything, live the questions now. Perhaps then someday far in the future, you'll gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. So here are some images from kind of works in progress, which often involve people doing things in physical space. And the one example I'm going to kind of go to in a little bit more detail is our first project that we made back in 2012, which is called Door into the Dark. Door into the Dark was an exploration of how to make a documentary about being lost, where somebody might become lost. I'm just going to quickly talk over the trailer. It's pretty dated now.
This is a labyrinth. For now, all you need to do is follow the rope.
When you're blind, there's no sun, except there's warmth. There's no blue sky, there's no clouds. There are no walls. There are no limits to your world. You are a body standing on something in space.
Can you feel the hairs on your cheeks? Are they wide awake?
So I'm just going to leave it there for time. But effectively, with Door into the Dark, the experience took place in a 6,000 square meter warehouse, usually, or abandoned factory, occasionally in slightly more luxurious places. And in a way, it's very representative of the question that I feel like we're still trying to do, which is that challenge of what it means to face the unknown, being geographically lost, somewhat as a experiential metaphor of finding out that your belief systems were incorrect. You hear the story of a man who's lost his sight, talking about what it feels like to be blind as you are also blinded. And then also the story of somebody who is climbing a mountain and suddenly has the urge to jump amongst others. You start off holding a rope, blindfolded, and then it stops in midair and you have to step forward. So this, I've dug this out, is a really early diagram, in fact, probably the first diagram that we put together, trying to think about what the journey was for the participant. And in many ways, because my background, and so is Amy, is in film, we thought a little bit like a kind of physical edit of experience, where in the same way that with an edit of a film, there are kind of tropes, let's say, that in a way, the kind of hero's journey being one of them, where there's a particular kind of epiphany at certain moments, redemption at the end, difficulty 2/3 of the way through. And so this was kind of how we thought about this physical design. And then how to achieve it really was reverse engineered from this document, which involved here's the rope, which nobody ever saw, lots of different kinds of textures. And then the moment of elation was actually created through asking somebody to lean against a wall, which lowered slowly like a fluffy bed. So this was, without us knowing it, kind of our entry into VR, but kind of tactile VR. And our experimentation kind of proved itself worthy of continuing. And here's a quote from someone who said, that experience was transformative. I felt so zen afterwards, like I've been on ecstasy or just finished 3 hours of yoga. I'm still feeling the after effects. So what is that, and how do you find that? I mean, the truth was we spent quite a lot of time with our eyes closed in a place called the Children's Scrap Store, where there was very cheap materials, kind of climbing into bins to try and understand what different physical sensations might elicit emotionally, but also thinking that in tandem with the stories of the people whose interviews we were doing. Obviously, I'm still at heart trying to bring a documentary narrative to life in a way, new way or an old way or just a way. And it felt like there was some learnings from Door into the Dark which were useful for future projects, which we'll talk about, and they were to find a personal way in, make it clear to users that they're needed in your experience. The body holds emotions. Everybody's body holds emotions, and finding ways to release them becomes the kind of goal, giving the user space to feel those emotions and ending kindly. So there's a very joyful moment at the end, which I'm not going to discuss now. So then, jumping forward a decade or so, I'm going to talk a little bit about our project Goliath, which maybe some of you have seen, and what the challenge was. So, and this might link to Sarah's question around why do we still make VR, and should we? So between Door into the Dark and Goliath, we made a bunch of different virtual reality projects, and there's lots of really horrible challenges with VR, which I'm sure everybody who's ever tried to make a project will know. And it was actually 5 years ago that I thought, hey, maybe we should do one last VR project, and what would be the most kind of what's the most appropriate subject matter for a story in VR? Of course, there are many possibilities, but the thing that struck me was, for 2 reasons, was to do a story about the experience of somebody with schizophrenia. And this, my co-director had a close friend who had told him that while he was watching Twitch, he'd seen his brother streaming, and that he'd heard his brother's voice while he was streaming, and his brother had been in a psychiatric ward for 8 years. And when he heard his brother talking on Twitch, he sounded like the man who he had lost to, 10 years of medication and sickness. And it felt like there was somewhere in that story about gaming and about psychosis, a theme about virtual realities that might be not just kind of a witty connection to make in VR, but something a little bit more profound. And so that was the story of John. And fundamentally, I know that we mentioned that we were going to be talking about impact. So, I mean, there's a longer talk probably about what is impact and what's the point of it. But anybody kind of with a history of documentary, I feel like there is a kind of there is always a kind of a system of values which people have, which they make their work with, and I think that kind of coming from this background of working in news and feeling frustrated by the worlds which are encapsulated within terminology, like what does Muslim mean to you, or what does mental health sound like, and what becomes useful or useless. There's something in the opportunity of embodying experiences that might allow us a kind of reset for what we think about those ideas without the danger of what's in a word. So there's actually a pretty kind of on the nose quote from a well-known British television host from the 60s, which is the problem with words is you never know whose mouth they've been in. Anyway, so that aside, there's, you know, for various reasons, it felt very both personally and kind of meaningful to do a story about schizophrenia, which is the most stigmatized of all mental health conditions. Cinema has, for many decades, used people with a diagnosis of schizophrenia or schizophrenics, not least in the latest representation of the Joker, as a kind of you know, useful psycho for kind of terrifying endings. But if you have schizophrenia, you're more likely to be a victim of violence than a perpetrator of violence. And as well as that, people with this diagnosis have a lower life expectancy by over 2 decades, and it's really due to people having an isolation within their lives. So just kind of skipping through, those were the reasons to make the project. And so, to be really honest with ourselves, we had to be like, well, what is the outcome? And is that measurable? And how would we go about it? Well, the outcome would have to be that people would see, I think I have an echo, would feel differently about what somebody with schizophrenia is going through. So here's an extract from some of the experience of the gameplay in Goliath. It's kind of difficult to give a full sense of what that does at the moment. And really, I just want to skip to kind of what happened post the launch. So it got some great awards, was nominated for an Emmy. But in the run up to trying to make the project, we had spoken with a lot of people from within. We'd kind of partnered with a series of charities, including a large charity called Mind, to run focus groups with people with either a diagnosis of bipolar or schizophrenia. And we'd asked each of them who they felt would be most appropriate to see VR experience where you could truly represent what happened to them during a psychotic episode. And I really was very astounded that everybody we spoke to, the 70 participants of these workshops, had said they wanted to show it to their doctor. I think as a lay person, you think doctors, those are the people who really understand mental health. But, you know, it's the general public that don't really know what's going on. And looking into it a lot more, you know, it's kind of been a really long journey over the past 4 years, exploring kind of really the impact of how people are treated in medical facilities and what that means for their health. There's lots of really excellent studies that link compassion and empathy to outcomes. It's not always as simple as that. And here we, you know, anyway, so we ended up trying to be as proactive as possible to make sure that the experience didn't just have a nice festival run and wasn't kind of used in a way which might benefit the community that we were talking about. And quite early on, we received a lot of really moving comments just on the Meta Quest store, really, For example, Peter, I'm schizoaffective bipolar. My sister found this. Let my parents play, who could never understand what was happening with me. Now they understand, just a window into it all. I've tried taking my life multiple times, not being able to explain why, and this helps, if not fully, but enough for others to understand mental illness. And there's definitely something. Anyway, let's leave that for now. Then we also became more proactive, taking the experience to hospitals. Luckily, a lot of people invited us in, but it's been kind of definitely an uphill struggle to try and carve pathways into new places where, where people are keen, but maybe the infrastructure doesn't exist. But it feels like perhaps, the more I think about it, the more I think, well, perhaps my artistic practice is to try and put these kinds of interventions at the places that might be meaningful for the people who are doing them. But who knows? Anyway, so this quote from Dr. James Harrison, which was really moving. We filmed him just after he came out of the experience, and he looked visibly, looked kind of visibly quite somewhere between distressed and thoughtful. Through doing this experience, I can see that I have very fixed ideas about mental illness. This is going to make me reappraise those assumptions and help me relate to patients going through that. Anecdotally, we interviewed a number of doctors, and we asked about how their treatment of people with mental health issues in A&E, accident and emergency, might differ from people who have non-mental health related issues. And there definitely was a strong acknowledgement of the stigma affecting how people care. So anyway, there's more to say then. We can kind of go through it for questions and answers. So since the kind of public launch on the Quest store of Goliath, which it's been downloaded over 1 million times now, we've been working with NHS in the UK and nursing schools to create a training program with the project, which we've called Inside Mental Health. It's a mixture of the VR experience, a feedback session, and some biometric related readings to help people focus on what aspects of the narrative they need to unpack in a kind of reflective session. So far, we've the initial kind of partner in Bristol was a nursing school. They wanted to do the experience with 100 nurses. Now over 1,000 nurses have gone through that. And we're also working with people who are within the emergency services, police and first responders, who often have to confront the situation in a way where, it's difficult to see the human behind the mental health issue. And then our initial studies have said that 92% of users say it will change their behavior in the future, which is incredible. And we're kind of in the throes now of trying to do a longitudinal study that might even relate what the impact of the training has on actual patient outcomes, which would be incredible. So that's really the context of our work with Goliath. And I guess after 13 years, or however long it's been, 12 years with Anagram, it felt like there was this really powerful marriage between the potential of immersive storytelling and stories about mental health. I also can't see if people have got questions, but anyway, we'll have them at the end, I guess. So what was initially like a one-off experience, and famously to myself, I had said it was the last one we'll ever do. It felt that it was probably worth making another one. And that was part of the reason that we started working on Impulse, which Sarah introduced and came out a couple of months ago, narrated by Tilda Swinton, who also narrated Goliath, who's a fantastic champion of the project. And I think I'll just play you the trailer for some context.
The more you look, the more you see. You're bombarded. It's down to you to sort this mayhem. Suck it up. Circular thinking will get you nowhere. How much control do you think you really have?
So it's out. So why do we make Impulse? It's funny, as we very early on, when we announced that we were making a piece about ADHD to our Discord community who'd followed us and supported with Goliath, I got a few messages saying that ADHD wasn't as serious, and they felt like it would take away some of the attention from the story of schizophrenia. But I feel that this has been a journey now. We've been working on Impulse for 2 years, and it's yeah, there's lots of things we've had the opportunity as artists to challenge in a way which it feels we're very privileged to do, maybe some of the language and ways in which ADHD is situated within our community, our kind of, obviously I'm thinking from a particular like UK cultural perspective, but the way in which ADHD is spoken about. So it all began with Scattered Minds, which many people read and discover that they probably have may have ADHD, and here's a potted history of the term. So this is actually a typo. It's actually 1870 that it was initially identified as a disorder of lack of attention, described as flighty, careless, mercurial, and bacchanal. Gregory Still, who is considered to be the kind of clinical inventor of ADHD in 1902, termed it the disorder of moral control. And he said that people with ADHD, the signs of it were was a failure to act in conformity with societal standards of what is good for all people. Briefly, the focus on hyperactivity occurred in the 30s, and then now it's considered this term ADHD. Adult ADHD really only became something that was identifiable in the DCMS around 25 years ago. So late diagnosis of ADHD is really kind of what the project focuses on, and is what the experience of many people is at the moment. As a documentary maker, you know, the powerful moment that we discovered through interviewing people with ADHD was definitely the moment that people receive a diagnosis and how it makes them reconsider everything that's happened before that in their lives. Maybe some of you will know people or have yourselves kind of had this moment with ADHD. It's also considered to be much kind of presently a kind of almost a little bit of a craze. It's kind of a fad, perhaps a trend, and it gives the impression that ADHD is therefore kind of less significant, whereas there are a number of well-known writers who talk about the fact that because ADHD is effectively a constant state rather than psychosis where it begins and ends, the person with ADHD really struggles by just not seeing the edges of their own condition. So I think kind of my personal feeling about making something around ADHD quite early on was that I hated the name. I didn't really think it made a lot of sense. In most of the interviews we did, we actually interviewed over 120 people, asking them about their embodied experience of ADHD, their life story. Some were diagnosed, some were not diagnosed. Some might have had a collection of things. But what you could really hear in the language of those interviews was that there was a deep attention, but perhaps not to what was necessary. So in the official definition of DCMS, here are all the different ways in which you can identify someone with ADHD. Obviously, all of these descriptions are things that are observable by a person in authority. And then once you kind of dig into it, there is a litany of medical terms and acronyms, which may also happen and may also kind of be a sign of ADHD or part of the ADHD, pathological demand avoidance, conduct disorder. And I think our work on schizophrenia had taught us quite early on to be very skeptical around medical language and the kind of, I don't know, fear of challenging things that had capital letters and acronyms. And that looking and trying to find somebody from, very respected from within the field who was prepared to kind of look at the social history of the condition with us. And that was this man, Edmund Bark, who is one of the leading professors globally on ADHD. Here we are on a Zoom call with him, and this is a picture of him in a punk band in the early 70s called Antipasti. So he was very fun, and we had many long discussions in between our interviewing people. We'd come back to Edmund and we'd say, Edmund, we're hearing the term fire a lot. What can this kind of be related to? And he was really excited because as someone with ADHD himself, he was always interested in getting new connections. He was really excited to find ways in which this kind of documentary approach, or this like listening to people lived experiences, or just kind of an analysis of testimony, which is obviously not in any formal way, but just in a kind of experiential way, could give some insights. For example, there is often this claim that female ADHD and male ADHD are very different things, but actually perhaps, and this isn't kind of a verified piece of research, but perhaps it was through listening to these interviews that you could begin to hear how actually there was a kind of systematic repression of how women with ADHD might be seen because of this connection with being against authority. So there were a lot of things there, a lot of realizations. And then it also just came in time at the same time as the release of the MetaQuest 3, actually the MetaQuest Pro, and using mixed reality, and just this sense that in the same way that Goliath made sense to talk about VR and psychosis, that mixed reality and ADHD made sense, because how we feel in our bedrooms, or what we perceive and what we process and what we don't process, is something that perhaps we could try and represent. So just going to whistle through some of the kind of process of this. Basically there's like a mixture of representing people's stories, trying to do this in a way which is not too much around kind of the details of an individual, but to kind of make it feel as universal as possible. There were 4 characters. Edmund basically advised us on day 1 not to try and do one character, that everybody would disagree. And we found this through these interviews, the thing we heard time and time again was kind of the connection to high places, people who found themselves up trees, or acts of criminality, you know, jumping between tower blocks. And so we found kind of 4 characters who all kind of begin their story in a high place, but for very different reasons. Anyway, so this is probably a little bit too early. It actually has had a much more mainstream kind of acceptance than Goliath. You know, we got a kind of a long review in the Telegraph, and obviously this speaks to the fact that people are trying to talk about ADHD, but in my opinion, the way we talk about ADHD is so separate to how people experience ADHD. We're a little bit stuck, and this actual stuckness is causing quite a lot of issues within different kind of communities, like for example, teacher-student relationships, workplace. People with ADHD tend to have difficulty holding down jobs. 25% of people in prison in the UK, one study has shown, have got undiagnosed ADHD. So there's a lot of reasons to try and kind of crack this nut. How do we do it? I think, like, to some degree, this is just some of the explorations we were doing with what we could do with mixed reality. How do you kind of avoid, let's say, putting things in space, and getting people to walk around them, and kind of playing with shadow play, mood, cinematic features that takes a long time to find. And then on one side, trying to, you know, almost not in a real tense, but trying to simulate some of those feelings. This kind of the reason the title became Impulse was, like I said, we just heard this kind of really energetic sense of power, and then holding contradictory ideas at the same time. So we just wanted to try and find gameplay that spoke to those things. One of the scenes that happens in Impulse, so yeah, so kind of how the challenge in trying to like make sense of things using mixed reality. One of the scenes in Impulse is you have to play a game whereby you need to make a thought, and you kind of live inside a representation of your own brain. You need to take in sensory input from one side and make kind of symbols on the other side. Here's some early diagrams. So it works with the actual mesh of the room, without necessarily having to see the features. So you start to get a sense of, well, of the fact that kind of effectively making a thought is a very complex process, and you can be interrupted at any point. I'll just skip through that. So then there's different kind of ways in which you do this. So effectively your hands become tubes, and you need to take in sensory input from one side and fire out meaningful symbols. And the gameplay, this is the 4th level, but let's that person's really good. You normally can't play, but effectively it gets harder and harder, and it's a frustrating experience. So you kind of begin the story kind of having that embodied sense of what is frustrating, and kind of gameplay is a really good metaphor for that. And so then the other side, there's the interaction, but there's also the characters. We had to choose people for whom ADHD was really significant in their lives, that something had happened to them whereby an error that they'd made when they were younger, or some impulsive act, had meant that there was kind of a residual kind of problem that through the diagnosis they'd realized that it could have been differently. And also just hearing people speak in a way that lent themselves to metaphorical storytelling. And as I said, it's always good to end on a happy note, or some kind of sense that there is hope. And so just very briefly, this is our first character. This is Leanne. This is how we developed some of the kind of ideas around her. Errol Tara and Omar, which I'm not going to go into too much, so we can get to the end. But there's more to say there, and then kind of various kinds of storyboards, building their worlds, trying to achieve the mood, and then effectively these kind of, as you might have seen in the trailer, these kind of are represented around you. Yeah, and I think ultimately this kind of comment is the thing that we really care about. Someone with ADHD, this really has been like the story of my life. Help. People who now refuse to see me understand what I've had to go through. All my family are in that group. And I guess as we've launched the project and we're beginning to get a sense of, you know, where is the community that we should be more proactive in taking this project to. So many people want to show the project to their families. And we've already been speaking to both people like large scale companies who have kind of employment responsibilities to kind of train managers to help work with people with ADHD, or teachers. So those are the parts we're exploring. Healthcare perhaps actually is not quite the right place, because I don't know what it's like in the States, but in the UK, the waiting lists for ADHD diagnoses are so long now that in some places they've just closed the lists, in some, like, because there's no point adding people to an 8-year waiting list. So you've got people self-diagnosing and a kind of people being at a loss, kind of, well, what does that mean? Is it medication, or what needs to happen now? So, my goodness, that was a ramble. How long do I have left? People out there, are you still there?
Yeah.
It's hard. I'm just in my room speaking to a screen. Well, I guess I want to talk a little bit about the third project. And playing, you know, we decided to commit to making 4 of these experiences, and just make that commitment. The first one being about schizophrenia, the second one being about ADHD, and the third one being about body image, which initially we kind of were starting to explore body dysmorphia. And then similarly, you know, we always work with experts, we talk to people, we look into the history of the experience, all of that. When I say we, I mean I right now, but it's nice to say we. And some of the research which I know that I want to show you is just around some of the kind of how to find the interaction. So let's say on one hand we're interviewing people with these different kind of relationships with their bodies, and I guess one of the things which I've found helpful as a way to tell this particular kind of experience, that's kind of missing an A, is that, in fact, speaking to people, okay, let's start again. So the next experience is called Amorphous. It's around body image. We're really, really early. We kind of officially haven't really even started R&D. But what are the kind of, the dream is to create an experience that when people have been through it, they feel very differently about their bodies, right? So I think in a way, the ADHD piece is around empathy for oneself, empathy for one's community, and that will also be the same. And there's always, like, similarly, kind of what's the interaction that has a feeling to it. But I reckon, but because of the kind of sweet spot between embodied storytelling and VR, because it really is a place where your body can feel very different. We're just trying to initially kind of ask questions of, okay, if we have a multiplayer game and people are trying to solve a physical puzzle, what are the kinds of interactions which get people into their skin, and perhaps into a false skin as well? So so some of the work that we've been doing has been with people with phantom limb syndrome. So phantom limb syndrome is almost an easier kind of metaphorical start than body image, because in a way the experience of phantom limb syndrome is that somebody may have an amputated leg or arm that might have been something, or they might have had a missing limb, but they still have a very real sense that that limb is still there. And so through the kind of stories around phantom limb syndrome, we're almost positing the question of, if you feel that there is something that you have, is it possible that you feel it, but it is not there? That double chin or that gigantic nose or whatever it is. And it feels important to find a language that's even further away from the language of body image, because it comes with all of this baggage around teenage girls and Instagram, and how do we, in a way, take this kind of ambition even further and just do the experience without having to tell you what the experience is about, but also share with you the documentary. How can it be more pudding? More pudding, basically. So in the interest of more pudding, here's a little bit of a journey of a piece of R&D we did last month. And in this experience that was open to the public, happened to be in Amsterdam at IDFA, and we invited people to come and be part of this live R&D. They were given this piece of text when they arrived, which explained clearly that it was R&D, and that we were talking about the edges of their body. They all went through a questionnaire with some kind of serious and some silly questions around how they were feeling. And then at the end, they would draw a self-portrait. They also did one at the beginning, but I haven't put kind of all the comparisons there. Based on their self-portraits, they would be given a kind of diagnosis, a playful diagnosis, and they would be taken to the lab, the kind of limb lab. And this is a kind of an example. So, a fragile state. You're feeling fragile. This is an exploration of being brave. A startling strength. You radiate beyond your boundary. Fragile state diagnosis connected to being a balloon person, and startling strength connected to being a pin person. So here is an image of what the balloon person had to wear. The pin person has one pin on the top of their heads, and we kind of explored different kinds of gameplay. So is the challenge to avoid having your balloons burst, or submit to the inevitable bursting of your balloons? What does it feel like to try and protect something that's beyond the edge of your body? So here are different kinds of, so I think somebody's running away from somebody and someone's attacking them here. And just, the goal is really to get people to focus on this kind of other part of their body. So there was kind of explored with textures and symbols of animals. That person had to kind of interact with a fan. And then this was a kind of a strange costume using hands, and having people have to connect their jelly hands and their marigold hands. And then this other kinds of things involving potatoes, no socks. Oh yes, tights, many tights. And then the question is, how much do people need to, how long do they need to spend, and how much do they need to concentrate on a task to really feel like there's an extension of their body? So there's one thing I hadn't mentioned, which is actually this kind of the theory around body image actually came into neuroscience in the 19th century, when scientists observed how women wearing very tall hats, feathered hats, flowery hats, fruit hats, always managed to duck through doorways perfectly without hitting the top of their hat. And it was as if that was the edge of their body. So this is kind of where this theory around how adaptable our sense of the edges of ourselves can be.
Well done.
Brilliant. Okay, and then come back.
Yep. I'm working with other people, stuff around trying to focus on task, or just exploring, and just all of these kind of, we kind of get a few observations about what works, and during the debrief get a sense of what someone's focused on. Now, this all seems so incredibly silly, and I think that you know, as I said, the proof is in the pudding. And actually, we're working at the moment with esteemed professor around who works on interventions for people with anorexia nervosa in the UK to kind of help them at an early stage, exploring like, is there an aspect of this that would be useful that could be used as a kind of body break? I just invented that term, but it sounds like a nice thing. We all need a body break sometimes. Some other challenges. So this gentleman had to get the balloon into his back dinghy, and the person downstairs had to wipe downstairs at the bottom had to wipe all of the paint off their outfit, which I think has been my personal fantasy. Yes, in defense of ridiculousness, Ursula Le Guin, we cannot ask reason to take us across the gulfs of the absurd. Only the imagination can get us out of the bind of the eternal present. Perhaps she doesn't mean by that what I feel like I'd like to take from that, but there is something in the opportunity to play with ideas that allow us to come back to them with a different approach. And I still think this kind of yearning to challenge the things that I felt while I was working in news still is the niggle, where I know that no matter what you write, it carries with all this baggage. How can we come to these terms and ideas afresh? How can we think about body image in a way which doesn't bring us into this particular mind map? And I don't know. It's difficult not to relate it to the fact that we are in a crazy time. And the need for expanding our ideas is, I don't know, more urgent than ever, to put it mildly. That's it. I have 1 minute to go.
Thank you, May. That was an amazing talk. I'm so struck by how, when you set out to create Anagram, and it was about taking documentaries and how can we feel them in our bodies as opposed to our minds, like how far you've taken that and how that has been the guide through your work. And then also incredibly serious topics, but also being able to weld in that playfulness that also gets us to really think differently is really brilliant. So congratulations, just wonderful to hear. I could listen for hours about your process. And if people have questions, please raise your digital hand or put a question in the Q&A, and I will ask a question and then go to the audience. I'm sure they have many, many questions and comments. But I was curious, you are someone who came from news and film and made linear and had this instinct to move to embodied experiences, which then, of course, in our field has been where it's moved, and also that physical and virtual too is something you played with very early on, and now people are seeing the importance of that, of the embodied, of the installation, and you had the set and the physical and virtual. And I'm wondering, it also seems that you talk about this sort of really finding that interaction that you can feel, and that people really feel like you capture it. So I'm wondering, for you, how do you talk about why embodiment and what it really gives a viewer, or as someone who knows the experience, how they relate to it and how they, what makes it a different experience than watching something, and what's the value for you?
I think, yeah, I'm sure lots of people have kind of come across this bit of work, but I think I wanted to be really skeptical about VR from the very beginning, partly because of the kinds of people who were excited about VR, and I just thought it was kind of boys hype. But I think there's something, especially the work of Mel Slater, who really looks at kind of a few things that people don't know about his work. I mean, he's just incredibly determined to see how far being embodied in VR can change how someone feels about themselves. And it's gone as far as putting people in avatars where they are Einstein and then them becoming better at maths problems, to putting people with kind of a history of domestic violence into a woman's body, them experiencing intimidation, and that relating to whether or not they reoffend, and that the reoffense rates goes down. And at the same time, you know, there's something around the stuff that we know without remembering that we know it, which is kind of like this thing I'm trying to articulate, and I'm not doing it so well, which is like what is carried when we say Hamas? You know, what's the kind of big what changes, what would need to happen for anything to kind of loosen up? And sometimes, you know, I don't want to kind of advocate VR in place of real human interaction, but I'm not surprised that something can happen to you and you feel like you're in physical space, and it becomes a kind of memory, a memory that you will probably forget but feel like you've done it. And so, you know, there's also these studies with kids who I can't remember, I think it's a Stanford study, who they put I can't remember how old they are, I think under 10-year-olds, I mean they wouldn't do it now, into a swimming with whales experience, and then 6 years later I think 40% believe that they have been swimming with whales. So there's kind of, you know, it's a little bit like what happens to you in a dream, that kind of you know, ineffable sense that you've done something, or that when you see somebody in the street, you're like, ah, okay, I shouldn't do that. Something has taught me that when a homeless man asks me for money, I should be really polite to him, but I can't remember what it was. So what are these? I mean, I'm not kind of saying that this is a particular kind of set of values, but there are things that probably you can't remember about, perhaps seeing somebody in your family act in a certain way to somebody, and it making, you know, I think we're constantly in need of having our prejudices like worn down over and over and again. I think it's a constant act, and obviously it's great to just do it with real people in the real world, but there is something where, you know, what I used to love about immersive theatre, although a lot of it is really also kind of annoying sometimes, but there's this possibility of like, let's play at being a different me. What if I'm a really gregarious person, or like you, me, bum bum train? What if here, like, I could direct a huge cast of people, and then I come back being like, actually, maybe I'm not May, the meat May that would never kind of do X, Y, or Z. So this kind of room to, yeah, just what's a bit more of a flexible moment. So that's kind of partly what I love about embodiment.
That's great. No, that's really interesting. We do have a question here from Teresa. Teresa, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, sure. Oops, I had my other screen on. Yes, I had two quick ones. One is I liked how you used the mesh of the room, and I'm wondering, can you share another learning from Impulse about how you work with MR, right, mixed reality, instead of like keeping the user within the VR space, that perhaps surprised you? Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So blah 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 blah. Well, I think that, you know, there's something really, I think we were all really like, oh God, MR. It's just not cinema. Do you know? And when I say cinema, it doesn't have feels in the way that you can make VR full of feeling, because you've kind of got this person in an intense environment, and here you've got, I don't know, the fact that they look around and they see their kid playing, or their messy table, and so I think partly it was about needing to write to that reality, which has to be quite abstract, because who knows if who knows what people's rooms they're in. I mean, I think it's best to do Impulse at home and not at a festival, personally. because that kind of, I think actually one of the people who commissioned the project said at some point, like, the game is so fun, but then it ends and I'm in mixed reality and I'm so bored. Why don't you have more game? And I was like, oh, this is really good feedback. You know, we've just got to kind of drive the kind of sense of loss, the sense of kind of need for the adrenaline, and you know, the way that gameplay just really focus you on kind of like, give me more Beat Saber, give me more Beat Saber, the reward patterns of just acting. You know, so anyway, but I feel like it's don't use mixed reality unless there's a reason, because there's just a kind of, I mean, we spent a lot of time trying to kind of deal with this, you know, what is it, like CG and mixed reality? Everything's going to look a bit like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and that's kind of, do you lean into that aesthetic, or you know, is there something exciting there? And then the mesh of the room, yes, that was fun, but really what I thought was brilliant, and Barry's kind of spent a long time trying to figure this out, is all the stuff with shadow play. It's a very subtle mixed reality that even I kind of be like, wait, is that a real shadow or a fake shadow? So that kind of plays with them, you know, so it doesn't feel like a demo for a dinosaur app, where you have to place something in your room and walk around it, which all makes sense for like IKEA, but doesn't make sense for storytelling.
I'll wait to see if there's room for my second question after other people go. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Nariman, you have a question.
Hello, Mace. Thank you so much for this presentation. Well, I have a question about, when do you decide whether it's going to be a VR or a mixed reality, or what medium you're going to deliver it through? Is it in the ideation phase, or after the R&D, or at the very end you go like, okay, the VR thing is going to be better for my experience? Like, when do you decide what medium? And is it related to the budget somehow, or there are other constraints that tells you which medium you would use?
Yeah, I think at the very beginning, I think it would be hard to keep that open and do and kind of be able to, well, maybe not the very, very beginning. I think the very, very beginning, you're just like, what is this topic? And I think there is you know, I think if you've got past the like, what is the topic? What excites me about the topic? What is the challenge in the topic? For example, I think with the one around the body, it has to be VR rather than MR, because it kind of, it's around pushing that body illusion that you have super long arms, or you have a tail, or, you know, and that we all know isn't going to work in mixed reality. We did try and do some testing with mixed reality, but, you know, it's just, you know, you kind of those illusions. And then mixed reality for ADHD, that kind of was at the very beginning, which was just playing with how do you process information, because this thing where ADHD is around layers of the world, right? It is about the reality plus the kind of three-dimensional triggers of that. And really, with Impulses, anyone who's seen it, it's both VR and MR. It's just quite useful to, I mean, you don't need to do one. You don't need to do anything, but like, you definitely don't need to choose if there's like parts of things that make sense. Budget wise, no, I don't think it's a budget question. I think good projects could be made on the same budget for both of them.
Along those lines, are there other types of technologies or processes or materials that you're thinking about working in the future? I know you've done VR for a while, but you do go back and forth between other types of other genres, other technologies that you're thinking about that get you back to that, you know, how can we embody documentaries and how can we feel them in our bodies?
So actually the thing with Amorphous is it's going to be a lot of costumes as well. I think I'm really a bit desperate for tactility at the moment in my practice. And yeah, I think I don't I mean, sometimes you see a piece of technology and you think, oh, that would be really exciting to work with it in this way. I forgot to add this to the presentation, Sarah, but I think like there's a piece that we have called the collider where somebody is in the headset and the other person is using the controllers, and it's about power dynamics, and it's about what does someone else know that you don't know. And in a way, what I like about that project is it uses the technology kind of incorrectly. And in this kind of early phases of VR, which I think we're beginning to kind of move out of that phase, this question of like, what is this thing and what should we do with it is really open. And at the moment, I think we're kind of moving away from that. The kind of tech companies themselves are like, hey, why don't we make sports? Which is the logical conclusion. And so and then they're also, I feel like when we were kind of first looking at VR, there's this question of like, whose could this become? I think in many ways, I also moved into this field a little bit like by running away from documentary, because I thought, well, the gatekeepers of documentary are known. The way to kind of make documentaries is known. You begin to kind of see the credits of everything that is good has the same names on it, and you think, right, okay, there's something so known about this. What's really unknown? And I kind of feel like, okay, well, smart glasses, that isn't, I don't know if that's truly a kind of leap into the unknown. Obviously, the wonderful thing about the VR headset is that, you wouldn't be able to get the number of downloads that we had with the Goliath on that. And I think that thinking around when a project is around dissemination, I think there's a baby nearby, and when it's around kind of experimentation is different. But once you've kind of invested this much time in like your libraries and making things make sense, it's hard not to keep chugging away at the VR box.
Right. Yes, more questions, but let's see. Before we go to you, Teresa, there's one here in the chat from Anastasia Masachuk. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. She said, May, this was very inspiring. Thank you so much. I was wondering, what is your take on using AI in your projects or in documentary projects in general? What would be the boundaries to watch out for?
It's difficult because there's so many smart uses of AI, which is just around time saving. And there's so many pointlessly annoying pipelines that I look forward to each and every one of them being destroyed. And so so that's kind of, let's say, internal AI. No one needs to know about it. It's just makes things cheaper. You're a smarter person for understanding how to use it, and you're not necessarily stopping anyone getting a job, but you're probably saving yourself like insomnia for the 6 months. Then other kinds of AI, I mean, you've stumped me, Anastasia. I just noticed that John Fitzgerald was here. He
Yes,
kind of
he-
popped up and maybe disappeared. I don't know if he's still here. He's done a project with AI, which makes a lot of sense because it's in collaboration with the director of Koyaanisqatsi, and in many ways, all AI generated videos look like Koyaanisqatsi at the moment, and there's something kind of profoundly confusing about why that is, and maybe exposing ourselves to that will show us something. I don't know. I fear that making something about AI will get people to write about AI.
Mhm.
I feel like I'd rather write about humans.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's like, but that's, I thought VR was a gimmick, and now here I am 10 years later making VR. So I'm probably just going to be late to the party.
Well, when you do, I'm sure it'll be in a very interesting way. And in fact, Halsey Bergend had a question for you, and he also works with AI, so maybe he wants to come on and ask your question. And if you want to say anything about the AI question, Halsey, go for it.
Oh yeah, Housley.
Hey, May. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. Thank you so much, May. This was such a wonderful trip into your worlds, many worlds. My question has nothing to do with AI. I'm happy to, whatever, if it is helpful, I can
I
get
think
into
your
some of
AI
that.
project makes the most sense of all AI projects that I've seen, which is
Well,
about how do you stealing your voice. And I think everyone should message Housley and ask him about his project. Anyway.
yes, vocalized. Well, yes, well, thank you. That means a lot coming from you. As far as a question regarding the project you were talking about, I'm particularly interested in impulse. My wife has ADHD, and she's been struggling with it for longer than I've known her, which is 2 decades. So it's a big part of her life, and a huge part of it, and a huge part of, like, honestly, our existence as a family is based on her ability to get her medication and use it or not. So I was just wondering. I mean, that's probably mainly due to the screwed up healthcare system in the United States. But medication, my point is that it's a really huge part of her particular way of living with this and existing in the world. And it's almost sort of a desperation to sort of have it. And it almost sort of enables her to be her, which is a weird thing to say, but it's very impactful. And I was just wondering, and apologies that I missed a discussion that you went into about this, but you must have thought obviously about medication and how that could be a part of the experience. Press the button that gives you 6 Ritalins, and I mean, it's obviously that would be silly, but I'm just wondering, you've just so deeply researched this stuff. Like, I'm wondering, you've obviously made a decision, a very thoughtful, no doubt, decision on how to or how not to deal with that or include that. And I'm just curious if you had any more comments on that front.
Yeah, 100%. We thought about it a lot. In Blythe, there's a reference to his medication. I guess if a pharmaceutical company had sponsored us, we might have done it. But I think that everybody we spoke to, not everybody, but I'd say there are people with very different relationships to medication, and it was already quite a complex story. And I think that there were 4 characters in Impulse. Really the nub of the story is around them learning what is happening to them, learning what their brain is doing, and then actually only one person of the 4 people was managing their ADHD with medication. And I did speak to them at some point, and there's a medication shortage in the UK, and it was absolutely awful for loads of people and really complicated, because it's like, well, I need this to function, and I need this to function in a way which I'm supposed to function. So I think it would have just sprouted into kind of something to think about, but not necessarily something to do. And the question is, what are we able to ask for from our audience? I feel like us talking about medication isn't something that our audience can then offer. Let's say, I'm sure that there's like a campaign line, and I did invite this character to this, it was Tara. So when we did a public event, I just asked her to talk about the medication shortage and how she felt about that, because obviously there's a huge need for that to become apparent. And I think it's because everybody's buying it up in the States or something. But just a joke. But I think, what's the tool that we can offer? Well, I think it's around people learning how they're going to manage their lives, what they're going to ask for from other people. And that might be medication, but it's also going to be, like, as I'm sure you're aware from the past 2 decades, a kind of negotiation of what can you expect of me, and what can't I do? And what would I prefer to say I can't do? at this juncture, so I don't have to feel a failure when I failed to do it. So I feel like we were in that zone, because that's kind of, let's say, like the emotional annex of the story, whereas the story around medication, you know, I don't know how to tell that in a way which has feeling.
Interesting. Tabitha, you have a question.
Oh, hello. Hi. May, it's so great to see you. And I was lucky enough to be at Door into the Dark in somewhere around 2012 when it was at Sheffield, and it was a profound experience that I still remember. And at listening to you now, there's something very sorry, this isn't quite a question yet. Hopefully it'll turn. But just this thing, you know, I'm thinking about reality and its relationship to truth, and what kinds of realities, what do we mean by reality? What do we mean by a shared reality? What do we mean that a shared reality has broken down in this moment, depending on where one is and how one is experiencing the world? But so I put like 14 questions in the chat, but I think the one I want to hear you talk about a little is reality, because the way that you present your work, the way you describe the animating impulse from it, struck me like this, that somehow you are trying to find better, you are trying to articulate the lived experience of you know, being a human now, and that things like speech, documentary form, even the realm of ideas, somehow is not enough to communicate more effectively the lived experience. And so in your work and in your different uses of different technology, that it feels to me that that is what you are trying to get to and share. So that's a big assumption on my part, but that's what I took. And it reminded me of the kind of E.P. Snow's Two Cultures thing. And someone kind of framed it as, you know, we're all interested in understanding the world. It might be that scientists come to it through how the world works. Artists may come to it through how the world feels. And so that the fact you seem to start with a feeling, how can you embody that feeling to help share what lived experience is? In other words, the human condition. That feels really powerful. And so I just wondered, with that innate context, how do you think about reality? Because you work both with feelings and with experts. What is reality or realities for you in your practice?
Thanks. That's so nice of you to have thought about what I'm doing so deeply. I really appreciate that. I think it's actually, funnily, it's the last line in Goliath, which is extremely cheesy. But then I was at this event in IDFA, and the maker who was leading the event said, right now it's radical to be cheesy. Kind of wanted to hold on to that, even though I still think it's cheesy to be cheesy. Which is that the reason that feelings is a good place to start is that if you feel the thing that someone else is feeling, you know that you share something that's real. I'll never forget this gentleman who came up to me after Door into the Dark was in Tribeca. I know this is on YouTube and I already feel nervous about saying this, but said, you know, as an Arab Muslim woman, why is Door into the Dark interviews with 3 white men? I think I've been thinking about it for the past 10 years. And I feel like so many things about that sentence. I still feel happy that I don't feel like my choice was wrong, but it makes me feel that that I, maybe that, you know, this kind of like color doesn't exist universe is definitely out of fashion, but there's something around just just connecting kind of, there's probably a reason why you were in the dark. Just what is the experience that this person is feeling, and can you feel it? You both are feeling the same thing now. You start from something that's shared, you and the subject. I feel that you know, I think because my experience was in television, and because I thought, you know, as the person making the documentary, you have an incredible journey, visiting and filming and spending like a real time with somebody. And then I always kind of thought about what happens when that documentary is like on TV, and all of the signifiers that kind of came with that thing, and what was the message, you know. And I guess the kind of core message I'm looking for in documentaries, there's something I can learn from this person that I also need. I, as a human who feel sometimes profoundly lost, profoundly alone, also need something that this other human has learned to do in their completely different context. And then it's less. And I think what was really moving to me when James Harrison, the A&E consultant in North London, saw Goliath, and I really got it from his kind of maybe almost more his body language than his exact words, was, you know, it's extremely traumatizing being an A&E consultant in North London. And a lot of our language in terms of when we go and work with doctors is not so much doctors don't have enough empathy for patients. It's there's just a huge, I mean, there's a huge challenge right now in the NHS. There's like more people are quitting. I can't remember what the stats are, but actually there's something to learn from our kind of there's a reason why people feel like compassion isn't available to them at a particular point in time. And so what's the question is like, why is compassion not available? What is the state? What's the user journey that is necessary? And like loads of things are necessary. Like to be comfortable is necessary, to be feel secure, to feel like, you know, that's kind of it's own little web, right? Until you can both feel. I think in a way, I often think that cinema and the kind of user journey of walking into the cinema and sitting on a comfortable chair and the lights going down and the music and that kind of is all part of the like that ritual before you can be like, compassion is available, feeling is available. I'm just going to go cry my eyes out, you know, all of that. And then it's kind of cleansing. It's kind of there's almost like a natural hardening that we have that requires particular kinds of interactions to make us feel safe, make us feel playful, and then where we might be prepared to feel. I don't know. Is that what reality is?
Yes.
Thank you.
Wow, May, it's said so many interesting things. I want to go back and listen to this again and take notes. It's so much to chew on, to bite and to eat, as you
Maybe
say.
one last thing. I know we're out of time, but I have been thinking about it a lot in the context of global politics. And I've been thinking a lot about, you know, for many years as documentarians, we said that our job was to make people aware of the things they didn't know was there. And I feel like now, if we didn't know that we cannot deny that knowing is that knowing means anything, you know.
That not know.
That knowing, you know, many people know what's happening in the world.
Oh, that matters.
And I think knowing isn't enough.
Yeah, right.
So to say that our job is to inform, I think there's definitely something, and I don't think I've finished really finding what that is, but just the sense of, you know, what does this mean for people whose job it is to tell people what's going on in terms of what can happen even with the full awareness, you know, let's say. You know, spin is no longer necessary. So that's something I think that is important for your community also to be thinking about.
Absolutely. that we need a much more profound human, accessing a more profound place in our own humanity too, which feeling does, and embodying, and like you said, that knowledge that you don't even know you have, that's not just being informed. But then how do we get people to act? That's a whole nother thing for another chapter. All right, well, we are out of time. Teresa, I'll let you email May off camera. Thank you so much, May, for sharing an hour and a half with us and all your wisdom and incredible work. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you to our funders, MacArthur and Ford, who make all of this possible. And that's it for the semester. And we will be back in the spring, in February, with more talks. And until then, thank you and have a wonderful winter season.
Thanks everyone.